In 2002, a group of Falun Gong practitioners hijacked Chinese state-run television, and their story has just become an Oscar contender. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has brutally persecuted the Falun Gong spiritual practice. Before that persecution began in 1999, there were up to 100 million people in China practicing Falun Gong, according to the government's own estimates. And for a while, the Chinese Communist Party tried to take credit for it.
If you took a walk in the park this morning, you can see that the recent hard work the government has put into public health activities has not been wasted. Every morning starting from 5 to 6 a.m., the city's green grass, parks and public squares become a morning exercise heaven.
But once the party banned Falun Gong, state-run media broadcast anti-Falun Gong propaganda around the clock.
The People's Daily reports that Falun Gong is an evil cult. Falun Dafa is an illegal organization, and the decision is to outlaw it.
State-run Xinhua wrote, the so-called truth, kindness, and tolerance principles preached by Falun Gong founder Li Hongzhi has nothing in common with the socialist ethical and cultural progress we are striving to achieve. Wow, they actually came out and said truth, kindness, and tolerance has nothing to do with the Chinese government. That's actually refreshingly honest. But in 2002, a small group of Falun Gong practitioners in the city of Chongqing successfully hijacked the nightly state-run news broadcast to show a message about the reality of Falun Gong. It's an incredible story, and it's been turned into an amazing movie called Eternal Spring. The story is told largely through animation, done by the Chinese comic book artist Daxiong. He's illustrated Star Wars comics, Superman and Justice League comics. He also drew those Hong Kong protest posters we saw everywhere back in 2019. It's a really unique movie. As the Globe and Mail puts it, opening on the scene of a mass arrest taking place in Chongqing, China. The tension and suspense of this moment are captured at a pitch-perfect pace by the animation style, which conjures both traditional Chinese comics and Grand Theft Auto. And it could be up for an Academy Award. Joining me now to talk about the movie is director Jason Loftus. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, so first of all, congratulations on your film being Canada's submission for the Academy Award for Best International Feature Film. That's huge.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's humbling and honor, and we feel like we're representing a lot of very talented filmmakers because it is the first time they've chosen a documentary, an animated film, or a Mandarin language film. So, yeah, we're humbled and honored by that recognition.
Wow. And, you know, considering the documentary is about Falun Gong and human rights abuses in China and how badly Hollywood seems to want to get into the Chinese market, do you think it will actually be nominated at the Academy Awards?
You know what? We haven't really known what to expect all along. We just, keep sharing this film with people, keep talking about the film and what's inside of it. And, we're thrilled that people are resonating with it. So that's sort of as far as we're thinking about it. At this point, Canada's chosen the film. They believe we've got a shot, and we're going to do our very best to represent Canada.
So what inspired you to make Eternal Spring?
So I was making a Kung Fu video game a few years ago, and it featured a lot of hand-drawn comic book art. And we learned about this artist who was living in New York at the time, originally from China. His name is Daxiong, and he's drawn for Justice League and Star Wars comics. He'd also worked with Jin Yong, or Louis Cha, sort of the preeminent Kung Fu novelist in China. So we thought this is perfect. He's got the cultural background and this amazing artistic ability. We invited him up to our studio, which is in Toronto, and we were collaborating with Daxiong on this video game. And we learned that Daxiong came from the same hometown as my wife and producing partner, Masha Loftus, which is a city in northeast China called Chongqing. Now, Masha was not part of the Falun Gong community. She was the daughter of a mid-level government official there. She had no connection with any, persecuted groups or dissident groups in China. And so I think for her, hearing what was happening under her nose in her own hometown really hit home. And for me, I had an interest in the subject. So I had an interest in Eastern philosophy and meditation when I was in high school. And I encountered Falun Gong through that interest. This is before there was a crackdown in China. And so in 1999, when the Chinese authorities banned Falun Gong, just this narrative that these people are evil and dangerous and all the stuff I was hearing out of the Chinese state media just didn't reconcile with my own experiences and my own encounters, with the Falun Gong community in Toronto, which is where I'm from. And so that, I think, planted for me this seed of concern for the human rights situation and this interest in the Falun Gong subject from a human rights angle. And so when Daxiong sort of fell into our laps with this remarkable story of, this TV heist, this hijacking story of the TV airwaves and his need to leave his home behind and flee and all of that in its aftermath, it was just really it was this, I think, a story that both of us cared about and we wanted to tell. I felt as well from a filmmaking perspective, there was a really unique opportunity. I've seen animation used in documentaries very well. Waltz with Bashir was a film I really enjoyed a number of years back. I met the filmmakers briefly who made Chower when they were through Toronto at a festival. And I've seen it used in different ways, in different styles, and I really felt it can be used effectively. But what excited me about the prospect of this story was that we could look at the whole story through the lens of the artist. So typically when you see animation in a documentary, it's this kind of decision, this artistic decision by the invisible hand of the director, and you just kind of see it, but you don't know what goes into it. And for me, this was an opportunity to kind of pull the curtain back and to see the artistic process play out on screen. So we see how Daxiong's nostalgia and longing for his home sort of colors how that's reflected in his artwork. We see how the pain of trauma and everything that he's endured is also reflected through his brushstrokes. But then we see that as he goes and tries to retrace this dramatic sort of protest action that is the sort of core of the story, this heist of the state TV airwaves in China, we see how that helps him to gain some kind of new understanding of this event that really impacted his life. And I just think that speaks to sort of the power that art and the artistic process has. And that's something that really excited us with this story in particular.
Well, yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge of making any documentary about human rights in China is the lack of footage. And so the decision to use Daxiong's art style is really a fantastic way to get around that. And it really adds a very unique feeling to this documentary. I don't think I've really seen many movies like this.
Well, I think there's something unique about it. This whole idea of not just using animation, which is done, but infrequently done in documentaries, but of making the animation and the artistic process part of the film. I haven't seen that. And I think that maybe for a reason, like typically when you're shooting a documentary, you're going to go out, you shoot 100 hours of footage, you sit in the editing suite, and you start carving it up and you let that story sort of emerge organically. When you're doing animation, the process is very different. Typically, you're going to lock your entire script. You're going to have a storyboard for every shot in the film. You'll produce some type of animatic or like a reel, basically like a movie of storyboard frames that basically maps out everything. And you do that in advance because animation is very time consuming and expensive. So with our ambition here of like showing the artist animating and creating things, and of course what he's creating, it forms a part of the film, a key part of the film, the majority of the film. That meant we were doing both of these two things, these two processes that are usually at odds with each other, meant we were doing both of them at the same time. And that presents very unique challenges from a production standpoint. We were out there animating scenes. We weren't 100% sure that they were going to land in the film. We weren't sure. We definitely didn't know how they would fit or where they would fit in the storyline and how it would all come together, because we really wanted to maintain that observational component of looking at Daxiong and looking at his own process through his artwork of his journey and of what this means for him. So it presented unique challenges, but I think it was only because of that kind of leap that we were taking that we were able to achieve this kind of unique end result that we're pretty excited about.
Well, I know Daxiong is primarily a 2D artist, but the animation in this movie is 3D. What was that process? How long did you guys spend working on this thing?
Yeah, well, it stretched out over close to 6 years, I would say. It wasn't the only thing we did by necessity because, we're an independent studio. We were doing a number of different things, but this was something that, sort of a small and dedicated team kept chipping away at because we had this vision of doing something unique. You hit on an important point. Like this was something when we got into working with Daxiong, his drawings are very evocative and they just have so much detail to them, and they're colored with his impressions of what certain environments are like. So when he's talking about something that's personal to him, like his home, you can just feel it. It gives that sense. But no matter how elaborate the drawings are, they're still flat and they're two-dimensional. And so in a film, how do you really put someone into Daxiong's frame of mind? How do you put him into the mind of the artist who's experienced all of these things. You really want to give people a sense of place. And from a production standpoint, I think that was one of the biggest challenges. So our animation director on this project, David Sainama, worked really closely with Daxiong, and we were all collaborating to kind of find that way to make it all work. And what we would do is we would have Daxiong storyboard scenes for us. So if you look at the opening where we have the sort of widespread police raids, and it's a long shot. It's a oneer without any cuts in the shot for like over 5 minutes. Basically, we're just moving through the space. And the way we were able to achieve that is we would have Daxiong storyboard the scene, and then we would go into our 3D software and we would build it, but we would just build shapes. So here's, rectangle where a building's going to go. Here's a street corner, this kind of thing. And then we would use cameras in the 3D software to take images from different camera angles. So from different perspectives, we would be taking images and we would print those out on just sort of blank sheets. And then Daxiong would go to town and draw all of the detail. So all of those backgrounds, you can see it has all the details from his pen. That's his own interpretation of like, hey, what the cityscape looks like in his hometown. But because he was doing that from multiple camera angles, we were then able to scan those images and drape them onto the different planes in the 3D space. And so this way, then when you're building a scene, you can move the camera through the space and you have that 3D perspective. You get the parallax when you're moving around objects and into different spaces, but everywhere you look still has this kind of hyper detail from Daxiong's drawings because it comes literally from his pen. So if you see even moments in the film where we're going past the taxi cabs or the street trolley that's in his sort of childhood memories, if you look closely, you can see marker strokes because he actually hand colored those as well. And we actually just scanned those and draped them onto the different surfaces. So it was a unique, I think from an artistic standpoint, from a filmmaking standpoint, it's fun to kind of play in these new spaces and try and achieve a certain look and aesthetic. And this was definitely unique from that standpoint. But I think the overarching goal was to try and maintain this authentic feeling that it was from this artist. We're really using his art and bringing his art to life.
That's pretty incredible. And, since this movie is about, what the Chinese Communist Party would consider a pretty sensitive topic, have you had any issues or pushback to the film?
Yeah, so we spoke previously about my last film, Ask No Questions. That film was made in the middle of making this film. And so we were making both films at the same time. This one started first because of how extensive the work was. And we were making Ask No Questions at the same time, both of them very sensitive from a human rights perspective, obviously with the communist authorities in China. And we connected with Daxiong, as I mentioned, around a Kung Fu video game that we were producing. That video game was being published by Tencent, which is a major media company inside of China and a major player in the gaming space internationally, actually, as well. And so we were just launching our game on Tencent's. They had this Wii game platform at the time, like 200 million users. We were very excited about it. The game was splashed all over their homepage. We just thought this is going to be wonderful. And all of a sudden the game disappears. And then I reached my rep over at Tencent and we're told, basically the Chinese government, the authorities had contacted them and told them it's not an issue with the game. We had already been approved by the censorship bureaus of 2 different ministries of the Chinese government. It's an issue with me and my company. And I was asked, are you doing something not aligned with the Chinese government direction? At the same time, my wife's family members who are still in Chongqing City began being contacted and harassed by the Public Security Bureau there. And they're told, we know what you're up to overseas. So you hear about these things. You know that when you tackle a story like this, you hear about China's influence in Hollywood. You hear about how sensitive some of these subjects are. I would imagine there isn't a subject any more sensitive likely than Falun Gong has been in China. So you go into this wide-eyed realizing that there may be repercussions. But when you encounter those things directly, it definitely hits home. At the same time, though, you spend your time with Daxiong, you realize what he has gone through. You realize what has been endured by the other subjects in the film. Some of them, without giving away too much, do not survive. And you see they went through all of that in order to be able to speak up in the face of injustice. They went through that so that they could tell their story. And so, yes, there might be business repercussions or some kind of harassment and intimidation type thing. But what we face, it pales in comparison to what these individuals have faced. And we just felt it was really important to tell this story. There's blowback as a result of that in terms of business interests and such. But at the same time, we feel really encouraged by it because once we started sharing this film on the festival circuit, the response that we've been getting from audiences, from festivals, from, obviously from Canada in terms of the recognition with the Oscar selection, it's really encouraging. It means, there's a lot of people now, I think, who feel we have to be able to talk about these stories. Chinese people face a lot of risks in telling their stories, but if we can't even work with them to tell their stories outside of China, then do we really have the values that we say we hold so dearly? So you have to exercise them. That's my sort of understanding after going through this, is that we have to use those rights that we have.
So I'm also curious if Daxiong has gotten any personal pushback. I mean, I know he was considered one of the best comic artists that has ever come out of China. Has his work on this movie changed anything, especially after the nomination?
Yeah, well, Daxiong had already endured, detention and torture when he was inside of China, but things have continued, and I think in the aftermath, with the recognition the film has been receiving, he's been facing more of that. So the Canada chose the film for its international best feature entry for the Oscars on August 24th. On August 25th, a government department out of, I believe it was Wuhan, listed Daxiong among a list of newly banned authors in China. And so Daxiong's been responsible for sort of, art teaching materials that are used in educational institutions. Like I mentioned, he's drawn with Jin Yong and other novelists. He's published his own comics. So an extensive body of work that now I understand is being removed from libraries and institutions inside of China in the aftermath of this, which I think is kind of ironic to the response to a film that is about censorship and, the challenges of speaking out, that and the response that we get is more censorship. It's unfortunate. I think Daxiong has expressed his concern. He's kind of used to this kind of repercussion or this treatment from the authorities, but he's expressed his concern for the other people, who collaborate with him, the publishers and these people. And we understand that the Public Security Bureau has also been applying pressure again to family members and to people who've either collaborated with him or who may have wished to collaborate with him. They've also been kind of facing this pressure. So clearly the authorities are concerned and aware of what he's, been doing. But at the same time, their tactics are continuing to be this kind of like applying pressure behind the scenes and this threats and intimidation. And I think Daxiong's not only used to it. I think he feels that the best way to respond to this is just not to kind of counter the pressure, because I think if you look at and this is something that I learned through, the pressure that was applied to us on the business side of things, and with the family threats as well, or the intimidation, is just they're looking to see how you respond. So they know if they intimidate you in some way and you change your behavior, now they know they have a lever they can pull to change your behavior in the future. And this is something, interviewing survivors of these, detention centers inside China, people who'd been tortured brutally. Sometimes their conditions would improve and they didn't know why. And then they learned later on that, their family members had managed to get their name in a media report overseas, or they were listed in a human rights report, or individuals had called the labor camps in China and said, hey, we know what you're doing to so-and-so. So even though internally the guards and such who are torturing people and abusing people, they might be encouraged to mete out these punishments to get people to comply with the party's dictates. When they know that people overseas are aware of what they're doing and are paying attention to it, it can definitely have a deterring effect. And so, Daxiong has continued to speak out vocally with the themes of the film and continue to appear publicly, sort of championing it. He's really proud to have his story out there. And I think for him as a survivor, he feels it's an opportunity for him to carry on the message of other people who weren't so fortunate, who didn't live, but who had shared this wish to speak up and shine a light on what was happening.
And final, most important question, how can I get Daxiong to draw me?
Go to Comic-Con. He's in New York, Comic-Con, right before our premiere coming up at the Film Forum. You can meet him in person. You can ask him about his story. You can have him draw the beautiful Chris Chappell. Anything is possible.
Anything is possible. Great message. So where can people watch Eternal Spring?
So the film's, I know you have an international audience, so the film is playing all over the world right now. We will have a theatrical release in, 8 countries or something like that, and it seems to be growing every day. So check our website, eternalspringfilm.com. But a particularly important message, we are opening our U.S. theatrical release at Film Forum in New York City on October 14th. And I would love for people to come out. There's a couple of Q&As that weekend where I'll be there. Daxiong will be there. You'll have the opportunity to explore these subjects with us and converse with us even more. So that's opening weekend, October 14th at Film Forum, and then we'll be on over 50 screens with AMC across the U.S. in over 30 cities a week later, starting October 21st. So please look out for those for your audience in the U.S. And then anyone else in any other country, check us out on eternalspringfilm.com.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, and again, congratulations. It's a fantastic movie.
Thanks so much, Chris. Pleasure.
And thank you for watching. I highly recommend Eternal Spring, so be sure to check it out. There's a link to the website in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.